Now, can you hear me? Great. Hello everyone, and welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started. So if you don't have a headset already, it would probably be good for you to grab one just to make sure that you can hear all of our speakers. They'll be speaking into the microphone. It will be easiest to hear them with a headset. So. If you need one, I think Alvin has some in the back if you need headphones. Great. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session today, Intergenerational Dialogue, Faith in Action. I'm really grateful that you're here. My name is Savanna Sullivan, and I serve as Program Executive for Youth at the Lutheran World Federation. I'm also an initiator, co-founder of the Climate Yes movement, Youth Ecumenical Summit movement, as well as a Faith for Earth Youth Council with UNEP. So I'm really excited to be here, delighted to moderate this conversation at the intersection of climate justice, intergenerational justice, and faith. To start, I just wanted to open by saying that we know we're facing climate disaster in our communities. And the UN Youth Program wrote this week that problems that span generations require leadership that does too. Over half of the world's population is under 35. And so often here at COP, we know that young people aren't seen as equal collaborators in leadership conversations. So I'm especially proud to be on this stage with this group today because in addition to sharing their ideas, their perspectives, their stories with us, they're also modeling for us what intergenerational conversation and collaboration looks like. And I will say, in the spirit of intergenerational collaboration, we'll use maybe half to 2/3 of the time to talk intergenerationally here on the stage. And then the last part of the conversation will be a conversation among all of us. One of our core principles in intergenerational justice work, which is the work that I do with the Lutheran World Federation, is the idea that we all have something to teach and we all have something to learn. We all have something to teach and we all have something to learn. So we'll model that today on the stage across Christian traditions, regions, and generations. And I just wanted to also give thanks for this Faith Pavilion, where we get to model that also across religions and faith traditions. So really glad that you're joining us in this time. I'm going to not delay now in giving the moment to our panelists to introduce themselves to you. And so you know a little bit about their background, where they're coming from. I know I gave everyone a moment to introduce yourselves to each other at the beginning of this session as well, so hopefully you'll leave knowing someone new. So let's start. Where's the microphone? Why don't we start at the beginning? Would you please introduce yourself to our audience here?
Hello, my name is Kenyi Emmanuel Dube, and I work for the Episcopal Church of South Sudan Environmental Network, and definitely I came from South Sudan. Thank you.
Hello, I am Carine Wendland from Brazil, from the Lutheran Church and Evangelical Confession in Brazil. And I here in the COP to delegate to the Lutheran World Federation and then form part to the Latin America and Caribbean Forum. Thank you.
Greetings to all of you. My name is Bishop Dr. Amos Kiri. I am the president of the United Church of Christ in Nigeria, the baby of the Lutheran Church Federation. I'm representing a network of all African faith actors on climate change. And we are a team that has come from different faiths, and we are going to also present our stories at the course of this meeting here. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I am Patricia Mungcal from the National Council of Churches in the Philippines, where I am leading the Humanitarian Response Program. NCCP is also a member of ACT Alliance, Actions by Churches Together, and also I have co-founded SANGNILIKHA. It directly translates to One Creation. It is an ecumenical youth movement of climate and ecological justice volunteers and advocates in the Philippines.
Thank you so much, everyone. I think you can agree with me that this panel has an impressive series of titles, but we know they are more than their titles. And I know as a young person, I have spent a week and a half here listening to very impressive speeches, and I'm grateful for some of the things that I've learned, but I'm also a little bit tired of speeches. So I hope that today they really can bring their stories to us. And storytelling is a rich part of the fabric of many of our religious traditions. And so we really endeavor to bring our stories here and invite you to bring your stories as well in this conversation. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how the conversation will go, because I'm the type of person who likes to know what I'm getting into up front. They'll share a few opening remarks with us that kind of encapsulate a little bit of the story they'd like to bring over the course of this session. Then we have some questions, and we'll be in dialogue among us regarding this issue of intergenerational collaboration, faith, and climate justice. Then we will take some questions from the floor, and we'll also ask some questions to the floor. So audience participation and mutuality is highly encouraged. And then at the end, I'll ask them to give us a closing word of hope and challenge as we go on our way. So with that, I will open it up to Patricia to give us your opening word. What do you hope to communicate during this session?
Yeah, I hope to communicate that young people could lead, and we belong in spaces not just allocated for the youth, but for spaces where the conversation about faith, human dignity, justice is most relevant. And I'm seeing it right here when we talk about the climate crisis, the climate emergency, and our communities. I believe, as a Christian, our faith perspectives and our strong belief on the sanctity of the image of God in every person is very relevant with that. And as a young woman in the most disaster-prone country in the world, and one of the most at risk in terms of climate crisis, and one of the most dangerous countries for environmental defenders, we need that kind of solidarity. I need that kind of solidarity for my community.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. Bishop Amos.
Yeah, we are talking about climate disaster across the world, and we are also talking about adaptation. And as first respondents, the community of faith will want at least the climate meeting at this time to focus on financing, so that at least as first respondents, we should be able to use that to help them in also some of the initiatives that will address these disasters that have been coming up.
Thank you.
So I would like to say that the spirituality has played a role of action, listening, and climate emergence. And as religious leaders, we need to bring voices of the vulnerable and unite voices for a greater force. We have and are in many networks, okay, and we can go and we can go a lot. So happy to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I believe that most of us have one or two principles in our faith tradition, that is to take care of the environment. And that is our responsibility as people of faith, to inspire those that are with us in our faith tradition to do more in taking care of God's creation. And I believe that we will do more, and we will act, not only talk, but have more time to act. Thank you.
Thank you, panelists. I know we've already touched on some theology, that we are motivated by the image of God that we see in each other and in all creation, that we touched on the fact that faith-based communities have deep networks in local places that are most affected by climate change, and the access to doing the important work on the ground in these networks, or in these places via our networks. I want to go back to Patricia to ask this first question, because I want to really firmly ground us in the realities of climate change in your communities. We want to hear your story a little bit more. So what do you feel is the biggest climate-related challenge you're facing? And if you want to share also what is an effective climate action that would alleviate those challenges.
Right, thank you. Actually, I'm kind of emotional going here in the second week of COP29 because as I left my country, we are in the middle of a climate emergency. We have just faced 6 powerful typhoons in a span of 4 weeks. And I know it is usual for the Philippines to experience those kinds of emergencies at this time of the year. We call it the typhoon season, but it is far from normal what we have just experienced. And I'm getting goosebumps whenever I talk about this because these aren't just numbers. These aren't just statistics or buzzwords in the climate arena. These are lives. These are the people I share the land with. And they are being repeatedly battered by these typhoons. And now I am here in COP29. I'm hearing lots of numbers about commitments, promises, or words that would, numbers that would we would want to have. But I'm counting on these commitments to become concrete contributions, or rather reparations from what we are experiencing right now. And climate finance has a big role in this because countries like the Philippines, we have the least contributions to the climate crisis, but we are experiencing the heaviest brunt of this issue. And this is at the expense of God's creation. This is at the expense of human dignity, of human rights. And I can go on explaining how dehumanizing it is to have our houses destroyed by floods, for farmers who till the land for our food go hungry, and have rice and have to cook rice out of mud.
Yeah,
It is very dehumanizing.
thank you for sharing that. And I think it's important that we leave space to hold grief with each other. And I'm really sorry that that's happening. And we're here to also encourage and inspire each other, as you've just said, to move from words to actions. And I want to pass the time also to Bishop Amos. Maybe in addition to answering this question, you can touch on this issue that Patricia has just raised. Faith communities maybe have some experience in the relationship between moving from words, maybe belief systems, practice, to action. We believe a lot of things, we read a lot of things in our sacred texts. How do we move also to action? Can you tell us a little bit about what that's looked like in your context in Nigeria?
Well, to start with, I have earlier said that I am representing a faith community from Africa. So from the lens of faith community in Africa, the matter of climate change is a matter of life and death. We cannot deny the fact that the disaster that climate change has brought on the continent of Africa. In fact, we are the most hit continent when it comes to issue of disaster and injustice on matters of climate change. And so we have actually been the first responders when this issue of drought, issue of flood, and issue of migration, talk about also conflict when it comes to issue of insecurity. And so the issue of financing for us to be able to have proper adaptation is a thing that we will truly encourage, that it should not be something that people just discuss it on paper, but it has to be a tangible financing so that as first responders, we should be able to advance these kind of initiatives and processes to help those who are really, really vulnerable. And so to me, the biggest related challenge that has to do with climate change is environmental. And so as faith-based people, we have actually formed this group in 2022. We have the Faith Actors Network on Climate Justice. And it is a continental body that has also decentralized to regions and also at the national level to ensure that we are able to bring together everybody on board to address this monster. And it might interest you to know that we have the young people. So I'm glad when you place me in the midst of the youths here. So they have also been brought together, and it is an interfaith. So we have the Muslims on board, and together we have been working. We have to join our hands to be able to address this monster. So in some of our processes and some of our local initiatives are also being done at regional, national, and also continental level.
And you've said that this is the work that you've been doing with this specific group since 2022. And I want to ask you, and also maybe Carine, we know that faith-based actors are are doing this work at the local level. What do you think are the next steps for faith leaders in climate action? What do you hope that these groups will do in the future moving forward? How do we continue the progress as faith-based actors?
Well, as faith actors, it is a continuous thing. Since we live on this planet Earth, we will continue to synthesize people's mind. We will continue to bring people on board so that together we will join our hands. You know, we live in an era of those who are skeptics. There are also those who are denialists. Despite the fact of all that is going on, a lot of people will not believe that this is about climate change. So faith actors, as first respondents, we have always been in the forefront, and we will continue to be in the forefront in enlightening them, educating, and also creating awareness on the disaster that is actually affecting virtually every community on the continent of Africa.
Thanks. I know from my home context in the U.S., it is also sometimes faith-based actors who are perpetuating, as you said, this skepticism or denial of the reality of climate change. And so I think maybe this is also part of the future for faith groups to continue to sympathize within our faith communities. I want to pass the time to Carine to also answer this question. Carine, how can faith leaders, young and old, respond to climate change better in your community?
So I think first, a big challenge is because we need listen to nature, and we go so disconnecting. And then for the beginning activists on welcoming and Episcopal and other side and other space, I think at this scoring, as may seem, in fact, there aren't mine to those who have just entered this space of climate action to open the door for other spirituality. what they say, we are in us spirituality, but we close the door, and the other experiences are so many different, so many beautiful. And for example, in Brazil, we have more than 300 indigenous people, ethnies, yeah, and more than 270 language, and then they are so different concept of feeling, of caring, of belonging to nature. And then I will tell young activists to invite to read, to understand the concept, the how for now the can influence, and we can influence in the government, in the policies, and include in these decisions. Yeah.
Thank you. I really appreciate this point that you've made about actions that faith leaders can take to further climate justice include not only like actions that we're taking in our communities, but some kind of reflection to see in ourselves where we're resistant to learning more about other spiritual traditions, and to open ourselves up to the idea that other spiritualities could help us understand better how we can show up faithfully in our communities to work for climate justice, and to be sure not to close the door, as I heard you say, not to close the door to spiritualities that we're unfamiliar with or that are different from our own. I think that's a really wise word to faith leaders across the board. So Kenyi, did you want to respond to that, Patricia? Maybe we can ask her to respond, and then we'll come back to you.
Yeah, I find that beautiful, as said, about opening ourselves up to spirituality and drawing our inspiration from that. And I think it is something that we have. We as churches are good at exercising, but I do think, as Bishop has mentioned, we are the first responders. We are closest to the communities, so we understand that. But I would add onto that we could also, from my experience, we could also do better with opening ourselves up more. Because I've also, and now I'm wearing my humanitarian response hat, because I've also witnessed how churches could also tend, at the other side of the extreme, churches could also tend to be exclusive. One church responding to their own, their own faith communities. One church just for their own communities. And I go and talk to those churches. Do you think that when a typhoon hits this community, only the Catholics would be affected? Would only the Methodists would be affected? That's not so. So why do churches tend to respond that way? I think as churches we are first responders. But I do think there's a room for improvement on that.
Yeah.
And young people are a uniting force.
I love that.
If we mobilize them.
Young people are a uniting force in faith-based action. And I think this posture of openness is important. And also, as I said at the beginning, a principle of intergenerational justice is that we're never done learning. No matter how old we are, no matter how well we know our own spiritual traditions, we can always learn more. And we can learn more about who God is, who we are in action in the world.
Yeah.
A short word and then
just
back
to
to
add
Kenyi.
something about that is the main reason that AACC came up with this All African Faith Actors Network for Climate Justice, so that we don't leave anybody behind. It is not about only a denomination, it's not about the Muslims and the Christians. The monster is about everybody, which will consume virtually everybody. So the main reason that this faith, interfaith, has come into being, and we do not want it to be only regional or national. It has to be continental, and that is why we brought virtually everybody on board, so that we could also respond effectively.
Great. Thank you so much for that word. I'll pass it down to Kenyi to ask again, how can faith leaders, young and old, respond to climate change better? And maybe kind of also going to our next question, which is what advice would you give them? What advice would you give maybe especially older faith leaders from your perspective as a youth?
Thank you. I want to say first that the problem that we're having as young people, first of all, is that the older generation, they... Let me not jump there.
Yeah, start at the beginning.
Yeah,
maybe.
let me just start it at the beginning so that then I'll attack the older generations later on. Yes.
Well, not attack, invite gently into conversation.
So one thing is about there are people who are living in denial, not only those who are in power, but even those faith leaders who are living in denial of this critical issue of climate crisis. I'm living in a place that was hit badly by the climate crisis. We are struggling. And then, because I'm a campaigner with Climate Yes, and we bring young people from different faith groups. And the problem here is that most of these young people don't understand from their faith, what are their principles of taking care of this creation. And then it becomes very difficult. So this is a challenge to faith leaders to always make sure that they enlighten their followers or the people within their faith to know what are the principles within their faith tradition of taking care of this creation, so that they will come with full force. Because it becomes a challenge. Me as a Christian, I'll tell them that yes, in the Bible it speaks A, B, C, D. And then I'll ask someone who is a Muslim, I'll be like, this is our responsibility as young people to take care and actually to be good stewards of this world. And then I'll ask him, what does the Quran say about caring for God's creation? Not only those who are Muslims, but even there are others who are Christians, they don't know that it is a mandate that God has given us to take care of this creation. It is not something that we are just there by nature, but then it is something that God has given to us. We just like to go further. We're living in a place that, for example, in my country, we are having 72 counties, and then out of these 72, 43 are affected badly by flooding. And then you'll find out that more than 1.5 million people are affected. Now these people are looking for higher ground so that they will be able to live in. There are incidents, just last month, there are 2 incidents where people sought refuge in higher places, and also there are animals who are also seeking refuge in on those high places. And then you find these animals are looking for prey, and then human beings becomes the option. Now, there are people who will hear about the challenges that comes with climate change, but then they will just hear as a story. But then we live in this situation. We are struggling. This is a matter of life and death. That's what we are facing every day.
Yeah.
And it's our responsibility of us, not only the older generation, but even us, the young people. For example, where I'm coming from is only the young people who can rescue people from the flooding. You'll find that someone, actually the water is up to here, and then that person can't help him or herself. And then it is the responsibility of the young people. And also, you'll find out that young people are engaged in actually creating waterways so that floods would not sweep the whole place. These are initiatives of the young people, and that's what we are doing on the ground. However, now the problem here is that when we talk about climate finance, let me just point something about climate finance. Yes, that is really very good. But even in our own faith tradition, there should be an initiative of adaptation from our different faith communities. That will be awesome as we wait for those who have contributed a lot in causing all these problems, for them to act. We also have a responsibility as faith groups to act on our capacities that we can be able to do.
Yeah, and I wonder in this room, I know many of our religious communities, our faith communities are taking action on adaptation. And what are those adaptations, and can we share those with each other? But I really like your first point as well about even when I engage other people of faith here at COP, I hear a lot initially about policy positions. I very rarely ask them, what about your faith inspires you personally to take this action? And I think it is a value that we can bring to multilateral spaces like this, because a couple of years ago I was at a COP and heard an imam on a panel like this say what we all know, which is that we know the science. The science says we have to change. The science can even point us in the directions that we have to change. So why isn't it happening already? And his point was that it's a lack of moral will. It's a lack of conviction. And I think that his point on the panel was that faith communities are speaking to people's convictions every day, every week. Our faiths, our religions are guiding us toward what is moral for me, what is moral for my community. And so that's an opportunity that this community has to engage, even with this broader multilateral space, to really ask people what drives you to do this work. Whether they would name it as spiritual, religious or not, to ask those questions of deeper ethic is maybe a gift that we can bring to each other.
Yeah, let me just say one or two things regarding what he has raised. I want to thank you that you have not attacked the older generation. And thank you for coming in. But I'll need to tell you that Afan CJ has done a lot of work in terms of bringing the youth to understand what the text of various religion has said about creation. And like I said, is continental faith-based community. So our approach has not only been Christian perspective, the Muslim perspective, and other religions. And so a lot of youth have been truly enlightened what those actually, the other texts have said, the scriptures, the holy books that have said about the responsibility of other faiths in terms of creation. So perhaps it is 1% or just a percentage out of what we cannot consider to be, maybe it's a unique one you're talking about, but I can tell you the truth. Most of the African states are aware, from both Christian and Muslim. They know their roles as to what they will do in terms of this creation that God has given us to take care of.
Thanks. Maybe we can go on to, I hear that the point about religious education is really important in this movement. From older generations to younger generations, and maybe I can also say the Lutheran World Federation is a group of Lutheran churches that over a decade ago followed the lead of young theologians to come to the COP in the first place. And that's one of the reasons our delegation has been made up entirely of young people for the next 12 years, is because young theologians are the ones who brought this to the global organization. So I think we have so much theological conversation to have. So Patricia, can you tell me a little bit about what advice that you would give to older faith leaders about engaging both this issue of climate change and also maybe when they're talking to young people specifically, when they're engaging in intergenerational dialogue? What kind of advice can you give to older faith leaders in this movement?
My advice would be, and this comes from experience of SANGNILIKHA, the Ecumenical Youth Movement, is to listen. I plead on our faith leaders, our church leaders, for humility to listen to the young people. And I say that because we know churches are very institutional structures. There are structures in place first, but we plead for humility. For the experience of SANGNILIKHA, we have, this is a youth movement that church leaders have supported our awareness raising, educational activities, but that just stopped there. And now the young people, we are left at, okay, we have learned about the climate crisis, we have learned the intensity of what we will face 5 years, 10 years, or right now, what are we going to do? And the churches don't have an answer. Our church leaders don't have an answer. So the SANGNILIKHA decided to form, to self-organize a youth movement, or Ecumenical Youth youth movement for ecological and climate justice. And so we are already organizing. We have these proposals, marvelous proposals on what we do with idle lands of churches, what we do to have this massive campaign, educational campaign, and how we could work with other sectors, grassroots sectors like farmers and fishers heavily affected by the climate crisis. But the church leaders would want tree planting, would want coastal cleanup, drastic changes because of the urgency of the crisis. So I plead to our faith leaders, church leaders, empower the youth, but also be prepared to listen to the young people.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it's one thing to want all generations in a room. It's another thing to operate with all generations in the room. It takes a very specific type of humility from everyone involved to be able to really embrace the gifts that God has given each of us. Thanks so much, Emmanuel.
Thank you. I also want to give advice to faith leaders. Okay. I would say that it would be good for faith leaders. In my context, when an elderly speaks, the young person listens. When an elderly advises, and then I'll just urge the faith leaders that let them speak more. If it is in the temple, it's in the mosque, it's in the church, speak more to the young people, and then we'll take your advice. We'll take the advice to be good stewards of creation. And this will also increase the work that we're doing in creation care. That's one. Secondly, there is also fossil fuels.